Warning, there's nothing scary about the following cartoon.
Welcome, this is your old pal Bigfoot. As many of you know, I'm the alter ego of the creator of this show, Peter Bernard, or one of his alter egos. But for this show, I've got a story that's kind of personal, and it's about stuff that happened when I was a teenager. And so I found this old passport picture of me as a teenager. Look at that idiot. Look how smug he is. Life is going to be fun and easy. Don't worry, life kicked him kicked him. Anyway, so I'm going to make a puppet out of this guy and let him tell the story to you instead of me. And the story is how I was Jim Brown's personal assistant for 2 weeks. Okay, let me change into a human. I'll be right back. Okay, let me try and get into the character of me when I was 17. Okay, I think I'm ready. So now do you guys know who I mean, Jim Brown? Like, remember Kanye West recently, not that recently anymore, he went to the White House to see the president, and he brought this older guy with him, and that was Jim Brown. He's a really famous football player from my father's generation. Okay, that's what I'm going to be talking about. But first, let me give you some backstory. Now, my father worked in show business, but not in the glamorous parts of it. He worked in like shipping and that sort of thing. And he worked for NBC in New York at 30 Rockefeller Plaza and other locations. And then after that, he got a better job at Columbia Pictures, which back then, at least I don't know where it is now, but back then it was out in Queens, in Long Island City. They had bought a bowling alley and renovated it to be Columbia Pictures headquarters. So everything was on one floor. So it was really weird. And the parking was on the roof. That was Columbia Pictures back in those days in New York. They're import, export, and shipping. And, you know, they would handle everything from getting the movies to the movie theaters. And they would also get the movies and TV shows to the TV stations, which back then used to run them on 16mm film. Pretty strange, right? I remember one of my father's friends worked at NBC on Channel 4 News here in New York. His job was he was a film editor. The reporters would actually have cameramen that would shoot on film, and he would have to actually edit a film for that night's show. It was not like today at all. It was not shot on video, and you would have to actually splice the film together and so on and so forth. And when video came in, that guy was out of a job. They didn't like adapt the people they had there to work on video. They just hired video editors, and everybody was out of a job. Didn't matter if they were in a union, because there were no more film editing jobs in news stations. So anyway, when my father was at Columbia, like, my father was a really big guy. When we would go places, strangers would come up and ask him if he was a cop, you know, and just like on TV, they would ask him if he was a cop, and he would say no, and they would say, because, you know, you got to tell me if you are, which I don't know why people think that. It's a weird urban legend. I don't think an undercover cop has to reveal himself to you just because you asked him. But anyway, that's a lot of people think that. And so they would come up to my father all the time and ask him if he was a cop. And when Columbia Pictures was shooting The Deep, which was sort of their attempt to cash in on Jaws, their first attempt to cash in on Jaws. Their second was Close Encounters, where they hired Spielberg to do a new movie. And my father actually brought a 16mm print of Jaws home when they got Spielberg, and all the kids in the neighborhood were invited over. And I don't know what the deal was, but apparently Columbia was like sort of unofficially showing Jaws, which they hadn't made, to promote Close Encounters. Really weird, but in a very grassroots way, like letting people bring home a print to show the kids in the neighborhood, so that everyone was excited about Close Encounters, to show them Jaws, which very strange, very different time from now. So I remember when they were making The Deep, they were having trouble with Nick Nolte because believe it or not, Nick Nolte liked to party a lot. I don't know if you know that. And so he would disappear, and they couldn't find him, and they couldn't shoot. So they thought, like, who's the toughest guy in Columbia Pictures, and also who's the one who can hold his liquor the best? And that was my dad. He got chosen to go down to the islands wherever they were shooting that and find Nick Nolte. And like my father's a private detective, he had to find Nick Nolte and then sober him up and bring him back to the set and then stay with him. And when Nick Nolte wanted to get drunk, my father would have to go get drunk with him and party with him because they could rely on my father to outlast Nolte no matter how much Nolte drank, and outlast him and bring him back to the hotel, get him ready for work the next day, that kind of thing. So my father had told me when he first found Nick Nolte, and he was horrified by this. He's like, it was disgusting. He had rented a house on an island and was having a naked party that was in its third day. And I was like, a naked party? What does that mean? He was like, oh, it was sickening. Beautiful women without any clothes on everywhere you looked. And I was like, wow. And like, I'm trying to act like, oh yeah, I'm disgusted, Dad. Yeah, I agree with you. But meanwhile, inside, I'm thinking, I want to work in show business when I grow up, you know? So when the movie was over, they actually, this was still in the middle of the shooting. They had to bring Nick Nolte somewhere, and they were stopping over in New York for about an hour between flights from one place to another. And it was Nick Nolte, my father, and Earl Maynard. And Earl Maynard had been Mr. Universe and Mr. World and all these titles. He was a bodybuilder. And he also was a fighter in movies. He would appear in these great fight scenes in movies, very memorable scenes. Like he has a great scene in The Deep where he and Robert Tessier, the bald actor, is another big, muscular, fighting kind of guy. They get into a fight, and they're actually holding an outboard motor in front of each other's faces, like trying to cut each other's faces and stuff. And they actually came up with that idea themselves on the set because they wanted their fight scene to be memorable. And they actually did it with a real outboard motor. There's no special effects in that scene. So Earl was telling us all these stories, and Nick was trying to stay awake. And so that was kind of cool to get to have lunch with Nick Nolte when I was 12 years old. So this was kind of my upbringing. We lived in the Bronx. We were not rich. We lived a few blocks from the projects, but we had our own home. So it was kind of this, you know, mix of different things. But one time Earl Maynard came over to our house. He also had a fight scene with Jackie Chan. He had a fight scene in a movie with David Carradine. You know, he had a really interesting career, and he was a really cool guy. And when he came over to our house, everyone in the neighborhood came over to meet him because everyone knew him from martial arts films and stuff like that. So that's the backstory. Now, when I was 17, my father told me that he had some friends who were working on this martial arts film, and they needed some like teenage production assistants that they could underpay because they had very limited budget, but they needed some staff to help them get the film done. So he asked me if I wanted to work for the summer, making $100 a week. And I was like, sure. And then, I was working on a movie, a martial arts film. This would be great. And when I was 17, you don't care. $100 a week is fine, And, but it's 12 hours a day. And I was going to be shooting in Staten Island, and we lived in the Bronx. Staten Island's like 3 hours away. One other person who worked on the movie was living in the Bronx, so I had to go and take a bus to meet him at this location where he'd pick me up, and we'd drive down the rest of the way, and we'd go back home the same way. So I was getting like 3-4 hours of sleep, maybe, But I was 17, I was working on a movie, I was very excited. Now, this movie was directed by the football star Fred Williamson, and it was a sequel to Three the Hard Way. And which was sort of famous back in the 70s. I don't know if anyone remembers it. I don't know what anyone remembers anymore. It had Richard Roundtree, Shaft, and it had Jim Kelly. Also in the cast was Joe Spinell from Maniac, and I saw him there. He was there one day, and there was this other guy named Captain Haggerty. I don't know if you remember Benji the dog. Captain Haggerty was Benji's trainer. But he also appeared in a lot of low-budget movies as the big fat bald guy, because that's what he was. And back then, there weren't that many big fat bald guys. Like today, it's easy to get a big fat bald guy for your movie. But back then, there weren't that many people with shaved heads. And he had this look, that was very unique back then. And he has a scene with Fred in the movie where he gets smart with Fred. And he says something to Fred like, let's see what you know about Kung Fu. And then Fred says, I may not know a lot about Kung Fu, but I know a lot about Gun Fu. And out of nowhere, he pulls his gun out of his tight pants and holds the giant, long, phallic gun in front of the guy's head and just back off mojo or something like that. This is a great scene. They actually had to cut so that, and then give Fred the gun, because there's nowhere on him that he could put this giant gun, because he's wearing super tight, like skin tight pants. That the Fred Williamson movies are really wonderful. If you watch for things like that, they're really cool. That's the best scene, in my opinion, in that movie, the back off mojo scene. And that's Captain Haggerty. And to round out the cast, it had Jim Brown, one of the greatest football stars of all time. Now, before going in on my first day, my father says to me, watch out for Jim Brown. I was like, watch out for Jim Brown? Why should I watch out for Jim Brown, And don't make me nervous. I've never really had a serious job before. It was my first movie. And so my father says, well, he's one of the biggest football stars of all time. I'm like, yeah. He's like, he's a legend. He's a part of American culture. I'm like, yeah. And it's like, and then he tells me some story about Jim Brown, like throwing a woman off a balcony or something like that. I was like, really? He's like, yep. And he got away with it because he's Jim Brown. He can do anything he wants. I'm like, oh, you're kidding me. Like, so he could like kill someone and get away with it? My father's like, yep. And I'm a stupid kid, and I also there was no Google back then. There was no way for me to look it up and find out that this was, he had trouble with like romantic situations. You know what I mean? And it was not like he was going around and throwing the people he worked with on movies off of balconies. He I'm not excusing what he did, but it was not like the situation like my father is describing the situation to me, like I was going to be in physical danger if I hung out with this guy too much, and that was nuts, but I had no way to know that was nuts, and it was my dad, so I believed him because, like I said, I was a stupid kid. So I go in on the first day to the Blackstone Hotel. Hear that? Can you hear the sirens? I don't know if you can hear the sirens, but I'm recording this in Manhattan. That's where I was that day, so I'm going to leave the siren in if it's there. And I went to the Blackstone Hotel where Fred Williamson was staying, and I had to go up to, I forget what it was, 3rd floor, 4th floor, whatever. And I get in the elevator, and I press the button, and the door doesn't close, and I hear this like sweet soul music approaching. Then I see this over my head, this giant hand. He stops the elevator door, and he comes in, and it's Jim Brown, and he gets in the elevator with me, and he's like, "Hello, little brother." And I say, "Hello, sir." And I'm terrified. I'm just absolutely terrified. And he's like, "Well, where are you going today?" And he's holding a little boombox, just a little tiny one. He's playing this music softly, and it's like sort of Motown-ish, but current to the time. It was like whatever that movie was, late 70s, early 80s. And he probably knew the people who he was listening to. So I told him where I was going, and he says, "Well, what a coincidence. That's exactly where I'm going. You don't happen to be working on the movie I'm working on, are you?" And he's being so nice to me. And I'm like, hamana, and I'm so nervous because my father messed my head up about Jim Brown. And of course, that's the guy I get in the elevator with. And so I said, "Yes, sir, I'm working on your movie." And he's like, "Well, you seem like a nice young man. I'm going to personally request that you're my personal assistant for my time on this movie." So I'm like, hamana. "Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir." But I'm so stupid. I'm like terrified. This is a wonderful thing that just happened, and I'm terrified because that's how stupid I am, naive, ignorant, stupid. I was stupid and am stupid. So so we get upstairs, and like he's greeting Fred, and they're all friends and stuff like that, and then he finds out that he's not getting his own trailer. And, he does not throw a fit, but he makes it clear that he's very unhappy and that the movie's not going to proceed until he has a trailer. But he doesn't need to, he doesn't have to scream. He doesn't have to throw stuff. But he's Jim Brown, and he's not messing around, and he's going to get his own trailer. So by the next day, he had his own trailer. Do you know what I mean? It was like that. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, he got his own trailer, because he's Jim Brown. It's like, how dare they not give this guy a trailer? He could have killed him and he wouldn't have gotten to jail for it. Like, that's a stupid. That's reality to me at this point, you know. I'm wondering, was Fred Williamson a good enough ball player that he could kill someone? Maybe he could just like punch someone out and get away with it. Like, I don't like how many runs do you have to, how many like points do you have to score to, you know? Anyway, I was a really stupid kid, but it was a wonderful experience actually, and he was super nice to me the whole time. I was terrified the whole time, but you know, he was super nice. You know, he was very professional, and you know, just like he was super great to me and to everyone else on the set. And that's all I have to say about Jim Brown. That's basically all that happened. Nothing really that interesting happened, because after he made it clear he needed things his way, he got things his way. So in a lot of ways, that was one of the great experiences of my life. I had, even though I worked so hard and I twisted my ankle one day because I was so tired, I loved it. And I went on to do a couple more movies before I got sick of it and stopped doing them. But because, you know, you got to be 17, 18 to do that, or at least 17 or 18 inside you. And by the time I was 21, I was like 30. So, I was over it and I needed to do other things. But that movie, One Down, Two to Go, there was one of the assistant directors had worked with John Belushi on, I think it was the Blues Brothers movie, I think, and he was one of Belushi's drinking buddies, and so he took me and some of the others drinking, and he was like teaching me how to drink, and thank God for him, right? And he was teaching me how to drink in a Holiday Inn hotel bar, and he was telling us all stories about Belushi, and the thing that was most memorable to me is that he said Belushi was really sad, and the thing he was sad about, and it would come out after he got drunk enough, is he was really sad that Hollywood cast him as a funny character when he thought he should be cast as the romantic lead in serious films, like romantic films, chick flicks. That's what he thought he was put on Earth for, according to this guy, at least, you know, this director. But he seemed pretty serious, and I kind of heard things like that other places, and he did play a romantic lead in that one film. Was it Continental Divide or something like that? So there does seem to be some facts that support this, you know, outside of just this one guy's story. But yeah, apparently Belushi was sad because people expected him to be funny. And it's interesting. There was recently a documentary about Gilda Radner, and she kind of was saying the same thing when she got cast to play romantic parts toward the end of her career. She seemed happier. So it's kind of an interesting thing that... But I don't know. I guess Eddie Murphy got serious for a while too. Maybe there's maybe it's just because there's so much more respect for serious acting in Hollywood, and people kind of look down on comedy that comedians want to be serious actors. It's an interesting phenomenon. If you ever watch that movie, One Down, Two to Go, look for Captain Haggerty, look for Joe Spinell, and also, you know, just Jim Brown, Richard Roundtree, Jim Kelly, lots of I think one of the guys who played one of the Chud monsters later was in there playing a heavy, because they shot like 2 years in a row. Like it was one summer was One Down, Two to Go, next summer was Chud. All right, well, that's my story about how I once worked as Jim Brown's personal assistant years before he hung out at the White House with Kanye and President Trump. We'll be back next time with something completely different. In the description of this video, we've got a link to our new Scary Stories t-shirt. It's our classic skull logo, and it says Scary Stories underneath in the Kaiju Monster font. It comes in black and also black and other dark colors, such as black. Good for ladies or gentlemen, hoodies too, whatever you need. I felt sorry for myself because I had no doorman. But then I met a man who had no Scary Stories Psychic Bigfoot vs. Savage Bigfoot paraphernalia. Did you know you could be wearing a Psychic Bigfoot vs. Savage Bigfoot t-shirt right now? They come in white, black colors, long sleeve, short sleeve, little baby red sleeve, wife beater size, pregnant wife size. Plus, you can own a Scary Stories Psychic Bigfoot vs. Savage Bigfoot hat, hoodie, journal, postcards, wall decals. All this can be yours right now by going to cafepress.com/ScaryStoriesNYC. Link is in the description.
come back for more scary stories.